So the Object 640 got leaked yesterday, right guys? And it is commonly known as the Black Eagle, one of the most iconic prototype Soviet or Russian tanks to ever be produced. A tank that a lot of, Russian mains and a lot of people that like Russian tanks would love to see in the real world, Jesus Christ, and also in the game, right? So let's talk about this very interesting design philosophy behind a Russian T-series of tanks that uses a lot of very different, mechanics and little things that would make this tank to be a very, very good event tank, which is basically what it's being leaked to be, right? So apparently it will be for Operation Summer. So what is the Objective 640 first? And in a very simple way, it is basically a Russian MBT prototype that was developed during the 90s and I think late 80s even, that had a basis of the T-80U, but was a very significant, change to the original T-series of tanks, right? So the idea here is that it was actually going to introduce a lot of little things that was going to be state-of-the-art on the tank, right? Eventually the project got cancelled and they produced like, I don't know, one or two of these, I think. I have to check. I think it was only one, right? And it basically was leaping forward on the actual technology of the T-series of tanks, right? Just like, for example, something like the Object 292, right? That was actually testing out the 152mm, for example. This was testing out a lot of the armor changes that would be made, right? So the tank itself is going to be, like I said, very modular, and it is going to be based on the T-80U chassis. It is a little bit more modified, but the basis is that. And the tank itself looks like a super T-80 or something, right? The hull itself is gonna be very similar to a T-80U, so the armor is almost the same. They say, to kind of a general idea, it has 1.5 to 2 times more armor, more or less, than the other tanks, from the T-series. But to be honest, the hull probably is pretty much the same as a T-80U, okay? Where the thing actually changes is in the turret, right? But before we get to that, let's talk about the engine and the power to weight of this thing, because it actually has a GTD 1400. I mean, it could be basically used with any engine of the GTD series, apparently, but of course the 1400 was the one that they used, right? 1400 horsepower, of course, and it has around 48 tons, so it should be around the same thrust, or not thrust, like power to weight of the T-80U, okay? So it should be feeling like a T-80U, so a little bit weaker than the T-80U, but a little bit heavier as well, okay? So it should be around that on levels of mobility. On the turret itself, as we're going to say, of course it has a normal 2A46 125mm smooth bore. It fires the round that they had at the time, so the first, it's complicated. We don't know what it will be the BR of this thing. On the very least, it will be firing the Mungo, but probably like the BM46. So I would imagine that the BM46 will be the main round, because of course this thing is from like literally the 90s, and the BM60 would be maybe too modern for it. So I would imagine that it would fire something like that, okay? But of course, there is an interesting version of this tank that they were planning to actually add the Object 292's 152mm to it, but it never got made it, basically, right? So but in theory, imagine a Black Eagle with a 152. That would be amazing. And why is that? Because the turret design itself, guys, it's very different from the normal T-80s. The first thing that you have to learn is that it uses a new generation of ERA, right? It uses the Cactus ERA, which is more based on the later generations of ERA that we already have in the game. You know, stuff like the T90M ERA basically came from the technology they developed back in the day with that, right? So the Relic basically is like an evolution, technically, like from the Cactus, right? Kind of. It's not really like that, but you get the idea, right? It's an ongoing evolution since the Contact 1, of course. But the Cactus would be way better than Contact 5. It would still use the K5 on the hull, okay? But the Cactus would be on the turret. And you can see the difference, you know? It's a lot more modular and a lot more protective, you know? It covers a lot more space on the turret compared to the other, you know, Contact 5s and stuff like that, right? So especially the idea here was to try to limit the collateral damage of nearby infantry, for example, that would be around the tank, right? Which was something that the Contact 5 didn't really was thought about when they designed it, right? So it was a little bit more modern, a lot more safer to actually use something like this. And of course, it would have a lot of performance against the tandem charge warheads of you know, normal, more modern missiles, and also against long rod penetrators, right? The long APFSDSs. So the objective here was that it was almost reusable on the same block, kinda. It's hard to find information exactly how it would work, but it is a lot better. Limited, you know, reuse of it, or multi-hit protection, sometimes it's appearing on the forums and stuff. But the idea here is that it would be a lot better than the original Contact 5 on the terms of tandem head, long rod, and safety against, you know, not against, but like, I mean, against friendly fire, right? That would be the idea. So the turret itself would be probably the best turret they ever produced at that time, you know, way better than the T80U, way better than the T90A, just probably worse than something like the T90M, for example, that it's a very, very, very late project compared to it, but still, it would be, one of the main features would be almost an impenetrable turret at the time, right? And another thing that it's very interesting, and you can see on pictures how weird that looks if you really look into it, is that it wouldn't have a carousel, you know, turret ring ammo rack, okay? It would actually have, just like NATO, for example, back on the turret kinda ammo placement and an auto-loading mechanism coming from there. So very, very similar to the Object 292, right? You would basically have this box behind the turret with blowout panels and everything, and you would basically have the autoloader coming from there, okay? I don't know how, like if it was half and half or if it was the whole round. I think it was the whole round. But it's very hard to find information about these tanks, but it doesn't matter. It would be the main, like, auto-loading mechanism would be on the back of the turret, of course, with more ammunition around the tank, of course, for them to reload there, because of course the size of that autoloading is sometimes limited, right? But at the end of the day, it would be probably only be used with that in the game, right? And it would try to fix one of the main problems that the Russians knew that the Russian tanks had, which was the problem of basically the turret carousel was just a, you know, a very, it's not a weak point because it helps the design because the tank is very small, but of course it is basically an explosive turret ring, right? So the objective was to try to improve safety over here, right? Just like NATO did, you know, at the same time, you know, so it's just improvements over a design, you know, philosophy. Of course, Russian design philosophies are much different than NATO ones on the terms of tank size, how the tank works in the battlefield, etc., right? So that was the main idea. So we would have basically a T80U that would have a much better turret design philosophy, a much better armor, capability on the front of the turret especially, and an auto-loading mechanism on the back. That's the main idea over here. Of course, I don't know what Gaijin will do if this thing is actually added as the next event vehicle, but the thing is, you gotta think that this thing was also made to be using the most modern stuff that they would use, right? So for example, the Drozd 2 was planned to actually be added to this. I don't think they ever properly tested or fully implemented, but yeah, the Drozd APS, it is the same APS that I think it's used on the T55, if I'm not mistaken. So it is a very old design, but it was being tested, and the idea was to actually, you know, add this system to this tank, right? Of course, thermal systems and stuff like that would also try to be implemented and stuff. So the problem is that it's a very, very early prototype and it never saw service. So I wonder how they're gonna add this tank. But at the end of the day, I think just being a T80U that has more armor on the turret and a cool, like, you know, auto-loading mechanism that it's on the back of the turret will already increase a lot of the survivability of this tank. And also, I mean, it would be just a very cool looking tank. It's one of the coolest looking tanks that the Russians ever made, right? Because it's such a small tank, but it has such a large turret, and it's basically that ultimate Soviet, like, very sleek turret design, you know. So it's very cool looking, and that's why a lot of people love this thing. So this is basically what the Object 640 is, what you should expect from it. So let me know in the comments what you think about the tank, if you would like to have it or not. Remember, this is leaked by the main datamine leaker, you know, Discord channel, and they are saying it's gonna be for the Operation Summer. So it's gonna be a while, like 1 to 2 months, I think, maybe something like that. At least 1 month, right? I think. I have to check when Operation Summer is normally. But, oh no, this is... No, yeah, summer. Yeah, because here it's winter, right? So there in North Hemisphere is summer. But yeah, you get the idea, right? So it will take a little bit of time. It's not going to be added in this update, but it is still a pretty good, interesting vehicle. See you guys on the next one. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and bye guys. See ya.